Hello and welcome. We are back with more Southern horrors and other writings. But before we get into the video, I do want to remind you I do have donation pages, a Patreon and a Coffee account. First of all, don't donate if you're in financial straits. I don't need you to put yourself under any more undue pressure. It's tough enough for us all out there. But if it won't hurt you and you wish to, then by all means, I would greatly appreciate it since it is just me, myself, and I that do this. Um, but the coffee account allows you to make lower donations and one-time donations, while the Patreon allows you to go month to month. But with that said, let's get back to the video. Today we are reading Chapter 7, The Crusade Justified. Appeal from America to the world. It has been urged in criticism of the movement appealing to the English people for sympathy and support in our crusade against lynch law that our action was unpatriotic, vindictive, and useless. It is not a part of the plan of this pamphlet to make any defense for the crusade, nor to indict any apology for the motives which led to the presentation of the facts of American lynchings in the world at large. To those who are not willfully and unjustly willfully blind and unjustly critical, the record of more than 1,000 lynchings in 10 years is enough to justify why peaceable government tending to ameliorate the conditions which led to this unprecedented slaughter of human beings. If America would not hear the cry of men, women, and children whose dying groans ascended to heaven praying for relief, not only for them but for the others who might soon be treated as they, then certainly no fair-minded person can charge disloyalty to those who make an appeal to the civilization of the world for such sympathy and help as it is possible to extend. If stating the facts of these lynchings as they appeared from time to time in the white newspapers of America, the news gathered by white correspondents, compiled by white press bureaus, and disseminated by among white people, shows any vindictiveness when the mind which so charges is not amenable to argument. But it is the desire of this pamphlet to urge that the crusade started and thus continued has not been useless, but has been blessed with the most salutary results. The many evidences of the good results cannot here be mentioned, but the thoughtful student of the situation can himself find ample proof. There need not here be mentioned the fact that for the first time since lynching began, has there been any occasion for the governors and of several states to speak out in reference to these crimes against law and order. No matter how heinous the act of the lynchers may have been, it was discussed only for a day or so and then dismissed from the attention of the public. In one or two instances, the governor has called attention to the crime, but the civil processes entirely failed to bring attention to their crime, but the civil processes which entirely failed to bring the murderers to justice. Since the crusade against lynching was started, however, governors of states, newspapers, senators, and representatives and bishops of churches have all been compelled to take cognizance of the prevalence of this crime and to speak in one way or another on the defense of the charge against this barbarism in the United States. This has not been because there was any latent spirit or justice voluntarily asserting itself, especially in those who do the lynching, but because the entire American people now feel, both North and South, that they are objects in the gaze of a civilized world, and that for every lynching, humanity asks America render its account to civilization and itself. Awful barbarism ignored. Much has been said during the months of September and October of 1894 about the lynching of 6 colored men who on suspicion of incendiarism were made the victims of a most barbarous massacre. They were arrested one by officers of the law. They were handcuffed and chained together and by the officers of the law, loaded in a wagon and deliberately driven into an ambush where a mob of lynchers awaited them. At the time and upon the chosen spot in the darkness of night and the far removed from the habitation of any human soul, the wagon was halted and the mob fired upon the 6 manacled men, shooting them to death as no humane person would have shot dogs. Chained together as they were, in their awful struggles after the first volley, the victims tumbled out of the wagon upon the ground, and there in the mud, struggling in their death throes, the victims were made the target of the murderous shotguns, which fired into the writhing, struggling, dying mass of humanity until every spark of life was gone. Then the officers of the law, who had them in charge, drove away to give the alarm and to tell the world that they had been waylaid and their prisoners forcibly taken from them and killed. It has been claimed that the prompt, vigorous, and highly commendable steps of the governor of the state of Tennessee and the judge having jurisdiction over the crime and the citizens of Memphis generally was the natural revolt of the humane conscience in that section of the country, and the determination of honest and honorable men to rid the community of such men as those who were guilty of this terrible massacre. It has further been claimed that this vigorous uprising of the people and this most commendably prompt action of the civil authorities is ample proof that the American people will not tolerate the lynching of innocent men, and that in cases where brutal lynchings have not been promptly dealt with, the crimes on the part of the victims were such as to put them outside the pale of humanity, and that the world considered their death a necessary sacrifice for the good of all. But this line of argument can in no possible way be truthfully sustained. The lynching of the 6 men in 1894, barbarous as it was in no way more barbarous than took nothing more than a passing notice. It was only the other lynchings which preceded it, and of which the public fact that the attention of the civilized world has been called to lynching in America, which made the people of Tennessee feel absolute necessity for a prompt, vigorous, and just arraignment of all the murderers connected with that crime. Lynching is no longer our problem. It is the problem of the civilized world, and Tennessee could not afford to refuse the legal measures which Christianity demands shall be used for the punishment of crime. Memphis then and now. Only 2 years prior to the massacre of the 6 men near Memphis, that same city took part in a massacre in every way as bloody and brutal as that of September last. It was the murder of 3 young colored men who were known to be among the most honorable, reliable, wealthy, and peaceable colored citizens in the community. All of them were engaged in the mercantile business, being members of a corporation which conducted a large grocery store, and one of the 3 being a letter carrier in the employ of the government. These 3 men were arrested for resisting an attack of a mob upon their store, in which melee none of the assailants, but had armed themselves for their devilish deeds by securing court processes, were killed or even seriously injured. But these 3 men were put in jail, and on 3 or 4 nights after their incarceration, a mob of less than a dozen men, by collusion with the civil authorities, entered the jail, took the 3 men from the custody of the law, and shot them to death. Memphis knew of this awful crime, knew then and knows today who the men were who committed it, and yet not the first step was ever taken to apprehend the guilty wretches who walk the streets today with the brand of murder upon their foreheads, but as safe from harm as the most upright citizen of that community. Memphis would have been just as calm and complacent and self-satisfied over the murder of 6 colored men in 1894 as it was over these 3 colored men in 1892, had it not recognized the fact that to escape the brand of barbarism, it had not only to speak its denunciation, but also act vigorously in vindication of its name. An Alabama horror ignored. A further instance of this absolute disregard of every principle of justice and the deference to the barbarism of lynch law may be cited here and be furnished by the white residents in the city of Carrollton, Alabama. Several cases of arson had been discovered, and in their search for the guilty parties, suspicion was found to rest upon 3 men and a woman. The 4 suspects were Paul Hill, Paul Archer, William Archer and his brother, and a woman named Emma Fair. The prisoners were apprehended, earnestly asserted their innocence, but went to jail without making any resistance. They claimed that they could easily prove their innocence upon trial. One would suspect that the civilization which defends itself from the barbarism of lynch law by stating that it lynches human beings only when they are guilty of attacks upon women and children, would have been very careful to have given these 4 prisoners, who were simply charged with arson, a fair trial, to which they were entitled upon every principle of the law and humanity. Especially would this seem to be the case when it is considered that one of the prisoners charged was a woman, and if the 19th century has shown any advancement upon any lines of human action, it is preeminently shown in its reverence, respect, and protection of its womanhood. But the people of Alabama failed to have any regard for womanhood whatsoever. The 3 men and the woman were put in jail to await trial. A few days later, it was rumored that they were to be the subjects of lynch law, and sure enough, at night, a mob of lynchers went to the jail, not to avenge any awful crime against womanhood, but to kill 4 people who had been suspected of setting a house on fire. They were caged in their cells, helpless and defenseless. They were at the mercy of civilized white Americans who, armed with shotguns, were there to maintain the majesty of American law, and most effectively was their duty done by these splendid representatives of Governor Fishback's brave and honorable white Southerners who resent outside interference. They lined themselves up in the most effective manner and poured volley after volley into the bodies of their helpless pleading victims, who in their boated prison cells could do nothing but suffer and die. Then these lynchers went quietly away, and the bodies of the women and 3 men were taken out and buried with as little ceremony as men would bury hogs. No one will say that the massacre near Memphis in 1894 was any worse than this bloody crime of Alabama in 1892. The details of this shocking affair were given to the public by the press, but the public sentiment was not moved to action in the least. It was only a matter of a day's notice, and then went to swell the list of murders which stand charged against the noble Christian people of Alabama. America awakened. But there is now an awakened conscience throughout the land, and lynch law cannot flourish in the future as it has in the past. The close of the year 1894 witnessed an aroused interest, an assertive humane principle which must tend to the extirpation of that crime. The awful butchery last mentioned failed to excite more than a passing comment in 1894, but far different is it today. Governor Jones of Alabama in 1893 dared to speak out against the rule of mob in no uncertain terms. His address indicated a most helpful result of the present agitation. In face of many denials and the outrages on the one hand and apologies for lynchers on the other, Governor Jones admits the awful lawlessness charged and refutes to join in the infamous plea made to condone the crime. No stronger nor more effective words have been said than those following from Governor Jones. While the ability of the state to deal with the open revolts against the supremacy of its laws have been ably demonstrated, I regret that deplorable acts of violence have been perpetrated in at least 4 instances within the past 2 years by mobs, whose sudden work and quick dispersions rendered it impossible to protect their victims. Within the past 2 years, 9 prisoners who were either in jail or in the custody of the officers have been taken from them without resistance and put to death. There was doubt of the guilt of the defendants in most of these cases, and a few of them were charged with capital offenses. None of them involved the crime of rape. The largest rewards allowed by law were offered for their apprehension of the offenders, and the officers were charged to a vigilant performance of their duties and aided in some instances by the services of the skilled detectives, but not a single arrest has been made, and the grand juries in these counties have returned no bills of indictment. This would indicate either that local public sentiment approved these acts of violence or was too weak to punish them, and that the officers charged with that duty were in some way lacking in their performance. The evil cannot be cured or remedied by silence as to its existence. Unchecked, it will continue until it becomes a reproach to our good name and a menace to our prosperity and peace, and it behooves you to exhaust all remedies within your power to find better preventives for such crimes. A friendly warning. From England comes the friendly voice which must give to every patriotic citizen food for Ernie's thought. Writing from London to the Chicago Inter-Ocean on November the 25th, 1894, the distinguished compiler of our last sentence, Honorable Robert P. Porter, gives the American people a most interesting review of the anti-lynching crusade in England, submitting editorial opinions from all sections of England and Scotland, showing the consensus of British opinion on this subject. It hardly need be said that, without exception, the current of English thought deprecates the rule of mob law, and the conscience of England is shocked by the revelation made during the present crusade. In his letter, Mr. Porter says, while some English journals have joined certain American journals in ridiculing the well-meaning people who have formed the anti-lynching committee, there is a deep undercurrent on this subject which is injuring the southern states far more than those who have not been drawn into the question of the English movement for the South, as I can surmise. This feeling is by no means all sentiment. An Englishman whose word and active cooperation could send $1 million sterling to any legitimate Southern enterprise said the other day, I will not invest a farthing in states where these horrors occur. I have no particular sympathy for the anti-lynching committee, but such outrages indicate to my mind that where life is held to be of such little value, there is even less assurance that the laws will protect property. As I understand it, the states, not the national government, control in such matters, and where those laws are strongest, there is the best field for British capital. Probably the most bitter attack on the anti-lynching committee has come from the London Times. Those southern governors who had their bombastic letters published in the Times with favorable editorial comment may have their laugh at the anti-lynchers here too soon, and a few days ago, in commenting on an interesting communication from Richard H. Edmonds, editor of the Manufacturer's Record, setting forth an industrial advantages of the southern states, which was published in its columns, the Times says, without in any way countenancing the impertinence of anti-lynching committee, we may say that a state of things in which the killing of Negroes by bloodthirsty mobs is an incident of not unfrequent occurrence is not conducive to success in industry. Its existence, however, is a serious obstacle to the access of the South in industry, for even now Negro labor, which means at best insufficient or inefficient labor, must be largely relied on there, and its efficiency must be still further diminished by spasmodic terrorism. Those interested in the development of the resources of the southern states, and no one in proportion to his means, has shown more faith in the progress of the South than the writer of this article, must take hold of this matter earnestly and intelligently. Sneering at the anti-lynching committee will do no good. Back of them, in fact, if not in form, is the public opinion of Great Britain. Even the Times cannot deny this. It may not be generally known in the United States, but while the Southern and some of the Northern newspapers are making a target of Miss Wells, a young colored woman who started this English movement, and cracking their jokes at the expense of Miss Florence Balgurney, who, as Honorable Secretary, conducts the committee's correspondence, the strongest sort of sentiment is really at the back of the movement. Here we have crystallized every phase of political opinion. Extreme Unionists, like the Duke of Argyll, and advanced Home Rulers such as Justin McCarthy, Thomas Burt, the Labor leader, Heather Burrows, the Socialist, and Tom Mann, representing all phases of the Labor Party, are cooperating with conservatives like Sir T. Eldon Gorst. But the real strength of this committee is not visible to the casual observer. As a matter of fact, it represents many of the leading and most powerful British journals. A. Fletcher is editor of the London Daily Chronicle. P.W. Clayton is prominent in Gladstone's great friend and editor of the London Star. P.W. Clayton is prominent in the councils of the London Daily News. Professor James Stewart is Gladstone's great friend and editor of the London Star. William Biles is editor and proprietor of the Bradford Observer. Sir Hugh Gilson Reed is the leading Birmingham editor. In short, this committee has secured, if not the leading editors, certainly important and warm friends representing the Manchester Guardian, the Leeds Mercury, the Plymouth Western News, Newcastle Leader and London Daily Graphic, the Westminster Gazette, the London Echo, a host of minor papers all over the kingdom, and practically the entire religious press of the kingdom. The greatest victory for the anti-lynchers goes this morning in the publication of the London Times of William Lloyd Garrison's letter. This letter will have immense effect here. It may have been printed in full in the United States, but nevertheless I will quote a paragraph which will strengthen the anti-lynchers greatly in their crusade here. A year ago, the South derided and resented Northern protests. Today, it listens, explains, and apologizes for its uncovered cruelties. Surely a great triumph for a little woman to accomplish. It is the power of truth simply and preservedly spoken. For her language was inadequate to describe the horrors exposed. If the southern states are wise, and I say this with a earnestness of a friend and one who has built a home in the mountain regions of the South and thrown his lot in with them, they will not only listen, but stop lawlessness of all kinds. If they do, and thus secure the confidence of Englishmen, we may in the next decade realize some of the hopes for the New South we have fondly cherished. But yeah, that ends that piece. Let's go back because there are a couple of footnotes. The first see, what was it connected to? It was only the other lynchings which preceded it, and of which the public fact that the attention of the civilized world has been calling the lynching in America, which made the people of Tennessee feel the absolute necessary for a prompt, vigorous, and just arraignment of all the murderers connected with that crime. So, yeah, the footnote says, for since the preceding sentence should read, the lynching of the 6 men in 1894, barbarous as it was in no way more barbarous than other lynchings which preceded it, and which the public took notice more than a passing note, took nothing more than a passing notice. It was only the fact, blah, blah, blah. And then the other footnote, Professor James Stewart is Gladstone's great friend and editor of the London Star. So Gladstone, a highly respected statesman, William Ewart Gladstone, served as Prime Minister of Great Britain on 4 occasions: 1868 to 74, 1880 to 85, 1886, and 1892 to 94. During the time of Wells' speaking tours of Great Britain. So yeah, but that's all the footnotes to that piece. Yeah. In a sense, she is showing how it is seen overseas, and notably with Great Britain, England, specifically of Great Britain. Because I think Great Britain's the full nation. But anyway, England. How they look upon lynchings. Because they ended slavery before us and were pushing for equal rights before us. So they were ahead of us for a lot of this in the treatment of African Americans, or people of African heritage, we shall say. But yeah. And she out of Wells makes it even more clear of what's going on, bringing even more attention. And so yeah, it's getting called out because there is starting to be national pressure, public pressure, saying, yeah, these things are not good. We know lynchings would go on for a bit into the 1900s, I think all the way up in the 50s, 60s. Because there's always the stupid out there who think, oh, they're not like me, therefore I'm better. No, you're just a moron. A bigoted jackass. Period. But yeah. I mean, what else can you really say? We've not already said the stupidity of mobs, mob violence over such stupid things. It's like those who believe, oh, the white race is disappearing. Guess what? It's only a modern fucking thing. The race. Because before, you were people. Everybody. It didn't matter what color your skin was. You know, like I said, I grew up in an area that there has been a history of racial violence. But even for me, it's like, how can you be so goddamn stupid? So ignorant. To sit there and be like, this is the reason why I want to hurt people. Buddy, You're a moron. Yeah. But we'll go ahead and end this episode there. As always, educate thyself. Think, read, study, learn. Someone tells you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. But it can't just be some random blog post or tinfoil hat conspiracy wearing site. Thank you for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.